After this video, you'll be able to avoid the $200 billion mistake that Warren Buffett made early on in his investing career, recreate the Coca-Cola business plan from $2 million, growing it to $2 trillion in market cap, and you'll forever think better and make better decisions. This is the power of mental models. It's used by great minds from Aristotle all the way to Richard Feynman, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, as well as, of course, the dynamic duo from Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. As they say, there's life before mental models and then there's life after. So let's cross the line today. We'll talk about what are mental models, how to use them, and specifically 6 mental models shared by Charlie Munger so you can start to build your system for success. Let's start with the story of how Warren Buffett made a $200 billion mistake by not using the 6 mental models we'll talk about today. The story goes like this. Warren Buffett started his investing career picking cheap stocks, and this made him a millionaire. And cheap is defined by comparing the working capital with the stock price. Working capital is basically how much cash and other assets you have left once you've paid off all the current liabilities, things like wages, rents. So what Warren Buffett did was to look for that discrepancy between stocks and their working capital. If the stock price doesn't reflect how much working capital the company really had, he would buy it up. And this is what made him into a millionaire. And mind you, this happened in 1962, so $1 million really is worth about $9 million today. So far so good, but 3 years later, he would meet the one stock that will change his life forever. And this was the stock, Berkshire Hathaway.
The original purchase of Berkshire was a terrible mistake.
Back then, it was just a textile business. It owned several cotton mills. Because it had the cotton mills, the working capital was roughly around $20 per share when the stock price was only around $7. What a steal! So Buffett went ahead and bought some of these shares. Now, Buffett had an initial plan. So at the time, the textile industry wasn't doing very well. And so this Berkshire Hathaway company would sell off some of their mills, take the money, and do a share buyback. So Warren Buffett initially wanted to then buy the shares, and when they have money to do share buybacks, he would sell it back to the company, making easy profit. And things went according to plan. He met the CEO at the time, Mr. Stanton, and discussed a tender offer. Basically, the company offering to buy the shares from Warren Buffett. During the discussion, Buffett said, "I'll sell it back to you for $11.50. They agreed on $11.50 per share, and so Warren Buffett goes back to Omaha and he waits for the tender offer in his mail. Except when Buffett did get the tender offer, it didn't say $11.50 as they previously agreed upon. Mr. Stanton wrote in $11.375. He wanted to save that $0.125 a share, and that pissed off the 30-year-old Warren Buffett. He said it himself, "If it came $11.50, I would have sold my shares." So Buffett said, "Forget it. You're not getting my shares, and I'm going to buy more until I take control of the company, and I'm going to fire you, Mr. Stanton." And that he did. $14 million later, at an average price of almost $15 per share, Warren Buffett bought enough stakes to control the company, and he fired Mr. Stanton. And here is where it all goes wrong. Warren Buffett now is stuck with a business that's going downhill, and he would try for the next 20 years to revive it without any luck. And finally, in 1985, Buffett shut down the textile business. This was, and I quote Warren Buffett himself, "the dumbest investment he's ever made." Warren Buffett himself estimates that it was a $200 billion mistake, taking into account opportunity cost. And this is the turning point of his investment philosophy, from just finding cheap companies to now value investing, or as he says,
Charlie Munger has had a big impact on me in moving me toward looking for wonderful companies at fair prices rather than fair companies at wonderful prices.
So what went wrong? You'll see exactly when we talk through the 6 mental models, and you can make sure that you don't make a mistake as big as $220 billion. Now, before we go any further, let's just define exactly what is a mental model. A mental model is a framework for thinking. It's a structure that helps you do 3 things with information. What information to gather, how to process them, and what decisions you need to make based on those information. These structures are created so that we can easily break down complex problems into their fundamental core concepts so that it's easier for us to understand what is really going on. And the quality of our thinking and decision making is based on how many of these mental models we have, how useful they are in our current situations, and how well we can use them. I've talked about a few core mental models in the previous videos, like the 80-20 rule, but today we're going to talk about 6 specific models that Charlie Munger recommends. Number 1, think in first principles. A first principle is like a fundamental truth, or what Munger calls a no-brainer. And this is a great tool to simplify a problem, and that's exactly what Aristotle used back in the day, as well as Elon Musk today with space exploration, electric vehicles, education. I know this still sounds really abstract, so we'll go through an example, but let's first head to mental model number 2, which is inversion. Munger gives a really illustrative example of the rustic who wants to know where he's going to die, so he will never go there. So sometimes we need to think backwards. The third mental model is to think through problems through thought experiments. When dealing with any problem, usually there are a lot of uncertainty and a lot of complexity. So in order to break those down, we'll use a thought experiment to test our assumptions, see where things go, so we can stretch our thinking and really test our assumptions. And in a moment, we'll go through a concrete example of this. Now, mental model number 4, it's multidisciplinary thinking. This means we want to think laterally. Again, Munger has a really illustrative example. To a man with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And the good news, you don't have to be an expert in multiple fields. You just have to know enough of the basics in order to think laterally. Which leads me to number 5, and that is the psychology of human misjudgment. Out of all the different disciplines, Munger is huge on psychology, understanding our cognitive biases, understanding the way that we make decisions, the ways that we irrationally think and act. So we want to add that knowledge to our repertoire. On this channel already, you've seen different ways of using that in your communication to help you get your point across. But today we'll talk about a few other psychology techniques. And mental model number 6 is the Lollapalooza effect. Now, this is a made-up word by Munger, and basically it means exponential results. In order to achieve exponential results, you need multiple factors to work in your favor. This is the key to achieving outlier results. And this is how Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett analyze their companies, looking for multiple factors that work in the favor of the companies they want to invest in, that indicate the robustness, the value of the company. Now, if you still remember that $220 billion story of Warren Buffett in the beginning, you'll start to see some of the problems that have occurred. First and foremost, he tripped over his own psychology of human misjudgment.
So I found that kind of irritating, and I didn't tender, and then I bought a lot of stock.
Letting his emotional biases take over his investment decisions. Then, due to loss aversion, a cognitive bias where we feel the pain of a loss so much greater than the happiness from a gain, Buffett couldn't cut his textile business loose, right? He's invested so much. Then to say, let's cut it now, it just feels so much more painful. So he spent 20 years trying to revive a business that's in a dying industry. Also, the decision to buy the stock in the first place didn't consider the Lollapalooza effect.
If they were cheap enough, he didn't care it was a lousy company and a lousy management. He knew he was going to make money anyway just because of the cheapness.
Buffett bought it because he thought he could sell it back and make some easy money, even though the economic situation that faced the textile industry was very negative. And those weren't taken into consideration because at the time, the main focus was on how cheap the stock is. But taking a more multidisciplinary approach is what he's doing now, right? That the company needs to be a wonderful company. And then you also want to look at, is it cheap? Is it fairly priced? How is it priced?
And that was enormously important because it enabled Berkshire to scale up in a way that would have been impossible to do otherwise.
Of course, in hindsight, it's a lot easier to identify these mistakes. But the idea with mental models is that in order to improve the quality of your thinking and your decision making, you want to make sure you see a problem through different lenses, through different frameworks, in order to make sure that you maximize the possibility of you succeeding with your decision. And the point Munger wants to get across is that these mental models, they are mostly common sense, but we just need to systemize it and structure it in our mind so we're actively using them. And while Charlie Munger says he has about 100 of these mental models, he chose these 6 to show how you can even recreate a Coca-Cola business plan, taking the business from $2 million to $2 trillion. Forget, 10x your business, 100x your business. This is 1 millionx a business, all using just 6 mental models. So let's go through how he does that. First, let's think in first principles, right? In order to get to $2 million, what needs to be true? 1, definitely it can't be a generic product. So we need to make Coca-Cola a strong brand with legally protected trademarks. What else needs to be true? Well, if it's going to be a $2 trillion business, it can't just operate locally in Atlanta where it started. It can't even just be a business in the United States. It needs to be a global business. So that means the drink needs to have global appeal. How exactly are we going to grow this business? We'll need to use a thought experiment and work backwards to see what we need to do in order to achieve our goal. Let's start from the end. Now, at the end of the 150 years, let's say there are 8 billion beverage consumers around the world. Next, since we're making a beverage, let's think about how much we drink a day. Since we're mostly made out of water, our standard water intake is 64 ounces a day, or just under 2 liters. Now, let's change that into servings. 8 servings of 8 ounces, which is around 200 milliliters. That means each year, 8 billion people drinking 8 servings of water a day, multiplied by 365 days. For 1 year, we drink 23.36 trillion servings of water. Now, let's make an assumption that out of all the water that we drink, 25% can be soft drinks of some sort. Then let's make another assumption that Coca-Cola would take 50% of that market share of soft drinks in 150 years. Is that too ambitious? We'll test it in a moment. But for the time being, let's take these assumptions and see what it means. Now, 25% then multiplied by 50% is 2.92 trillion servings a year that Coca-Cola needs to sell. Now, we're still not quite at the $2 trillion yet. So let's assume that on each serving, we make 4 cents of profits. This will give us a $117 billion in profit. So what does that mean for our market value? Well, let's do a quick back of the envelope. Right now, Coca-Cola has a price to earnings ratio of 46 for the past 5 years. This means that a $117 billion in earnings would roughly translate to a market cap of just under $5.4 trillion. And that's way over the $2 trillion mark. So it's a pretty conservative assumption to think that if after 150 years we can make a profit of $117 billion, we can get to that $2 trillion mark. So now it's time to do some reality checks for all of our assumptions. Here's how Charlie Munger sees it in 150 years. The value of the dollar will likely decrease. Together with the increased real purchasing power of people around the world, it means that they're more likely to spend more on the smaller pleasures, such as our beverage. Also, the cost of manufacturing is likely to go down with technological improvements, as well as the scale we'll have in 150. And the drink after 150 years will have the global appeal that we need in order to capture 50% of that global soft drink market. Now, having 50% of the soft drink market, that's also a really big assumption, even though it's 150 years into the future. So how do we make sure that we can actually achieve it? Well, of course, we'll use inversion again. There are two main factors. One is that of all the water consumed around the world, 25% will be some sort of soft drink. And then within that market, Coca-Cola will take 50% and the competitors will take the other 50%. And in order to achieve that, we need to have an outlier, an exponential result, right? The Lollapalooza effect. So we need as many factors working for us as possible. In order to do that, we need to think in a multidisciplinary way, right? We can't just think about how can we decrease the costs. We can't just think about how can we increase the price. We can't just think about how do we get this out there. So which factors are going to have a lot of impact? Well, based on our first principles, we've identified that the brand, the Coca-Cola brand, is at the core to how we're going to achieve that $2 trillion. And that's because the drink itself is not going to be generic, right? So we have already two parts we need to focus on. And the brand and the product need to act as stimuli for consumers that when they see them, they will be triggered to buy and consume the drink. And that brings us to mental model number 4, which is all about psychology and specifically conditioning. And Charlie Munger points out two types of conditioning we'll use here. One is operant conditioning and the other is classical conditioning. Of course, to get the Lollapalooza effect, we want to use both. First, the operant conditioning. This means that you want to reward someone if you want them to do more of something, and you want to punish someone to get them to do less of something. In this case, we want the Coca-Cola beverage to be the reward for people so that they buy more of our products. And to the best of our ability, we want to make sure that the competitor's product don't act as the reward. Number 1, we want to make the drink cold because we drink more liquid when we're hot, so we can maximize the amount of servings we can sell. Now, thinking about what to put in our drinks, we want to make sure we have sugar and caffeine. Why? Because the successful beverages that exist out there, like coffee, tea, lemonade, they always have both. And our body loves these two stimulants. Then, making sure that people actually feel like drinking Coca-Cola is a reward, we want to make sure through trial and error, we get the flavor and the taste profile to be as rewarding for our consumers as possible. And of course, we want to protect these rewards so that our competitors can't easily copy them and provide the same reward for our consumers. And to do this, we really need to be quick and use our first mover advantage to make sure we're available globally. And just like that, we've created the basic structure of what our drink is going to be like. And now let's go further with the second type of conditioning, which is classical conditioning or Pavlovian conditioning. And this is basically mere association. You've probably heard of the Pavlovian dogs. The dogs, when they got food, they would hear a bell ring first. And over a period of time, the dogs associated the bell sound with food. So when you just ring the bell, the dog will salivate even without food. In a similar manner, we want to make sure that people associate good feelings with our product. So how will we do that? Well, first, we want the name to sound exotic and expensive. Coca-Cola is a great name that checks the box. Then, the drink itself also cannot look generic. So with the color, even if the caffeine, sugar, water mixture comes out clear, we want to change it towards something like a wine where it's more distinctive. Next, we want to carbonate our drink because it will remind people of champagne, of a bubbly drink that's more fancy, that's more exciting, and so carbonation is needed. And number 4, we want to make sure the taste of the beverage is distinct and to the best of our ability, very difficult to copy so that we fend off any competitors and strengthen the association of pleasure with our drink. And so with the product itself, now we have a good idea of what we need to make. With a product like this that has mass appeal, that will be repeatedly consumed and has a global reach, we need to make sure we don't skimp on the advertising budget. Scale is our competitive advantage, and that applies to advertising buying. And so we will spend 40% of our revenue on advertising. As for the content of the advertising, we want to make sure we are associated with things that people like and admire. People love Santa Claus? We'll give them Santa Claus and Coke. People like a nice, smiling, wholesome family? We'll put a Coke inside that family. People love other beautiful people? We make sure they all have a cup of Coca-Cola in their hands. Whatever people like, we'll make sure Coca-Cola shows up too. And once we've got the association going, we want to make sure we also push for social proof. We'll spend money to get real people drinking Coke, even it means that we are forfeiting short-term profits, because this will give us long-term growth. Given the competitive nature of the drink itself, the more we sell, the more we're going to be able to sell in the future. So already we have a product. It's designed to leverage consumer behavior and reward consumers. At the same time, we're building scale to make sure that we fend off any competitors that come up our way. So now we need to do the reality check on, can we actually send our product across the globe? And this is easy if we think in first principles. Most practically, the drink can come in two forms. One is in its finished form. It's carbonated, it's in its individual containers, it's ready to be enjoyed. The other is more of a syrup in bulk, where it's concentrated and you'll be able to use it in a soda fountain. Now, since the main cost of our Coca-Cola, other than the ingredients, will be in logistics of getting it to people, we want to make sure that logistics is as efficient as possible. And thinking in terms of profits, we always want to be able to set our first sale price, which means we definitely want to control our syrup, and we don't want any vendors of our syrup or franchisee of our syrup. And in order to protect our market position, we want to make sure that taste profile of our drink is not easily copyable. So we want direct control of our syrup factories and make sure that we can delay the secrets leaking out for as long as possible to fend off competitors coming up with a similar drink. But of course, as technology advances, as food chemistry advances, eventually people are going to come pretty close to our taste profile. In order to make sure we're ahead of the game, we want to make sure that our logistics, our refrigeration, our transportation all have the benefit of scale. And we want to make sure we can provide more rewards to our consumers, such as making the drink 0 calories. Now, to foolproof our plan, we want to invert again and look at what we want to avoid at all costs. First, the brand is everything in order for us to get to that 2 trillion. So we need to make sure that the name Coca-Cola is completely protected. And if there are any other colas out there, that we are behind those brands and we're not competing against them. And this is what Disney did with Pixar. A lot of people confuse Pixar films with Disney films, thinking that Toy Stories, Finding Nemo were all Disney stories. And as Pixar became more distinct, they posed a threat to Disney. And that's why Pixar is now acquired by Disney and operates within the Disney company. 2, to make sure as many people drink as many Coca-Colas as possible, we want to eliminate any aftertaste that hinders consumption. And this can be done through trial and error, and the first mover advantage works here, especially when you have 150 years of making sure that you get it right. Number 3, we want to make sure that as many people support us, get behind our company as possible, because we want to reach 50% of the market. To do that, we want to make sure no one is jealous of our success. As Munger says, the best way to avoid envy is to plainly deserve the success we get. We need to make sure that everything around the brand, the affordability, the quality, the presentation, everything around this brand is something that people can get behind. And of course, we don't want to make any big changes to the Coca-Cola formula once we've established a strong association and we've done good conditioning around our product. All the investments that we put in, we don't want to make big changes because, as we've mentioned before, loss aversion is real. If we take something away from the consumers, they will react intensely. This will give our competitor a void to fill. All of the investments we've put in to create that positive association will be hijacked by our competitor. And just like that, with 6 mental models, we were able to build a business case for Coca-Cola going from $2 million to $2 trillion. And what this demonstrates is that you don't need an MBA, you don't need to have had experience in managing multi-billion-dollar corporations in order to come up with these aspects that the Coca-Cola company have been using. These 6 mental models simply helped you use your current knowledge and your common sense in a way to help you reach a goal. It's like what James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, said. Almost anything can be learned faster. One strategy is to ask the top people what they do and make their best practice your baseline. So make sure you incorporate these 6 mental models into your mental toolbox and make it your baseline. If you learned something new in the video, make sure you give this a big thumbs up. It really helps with the channel. Leave a comment below and let me know which one is your favorite. And subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll leave a few more mental models and frameworks for you to add to your baseline. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!